Hi, I'm Duckball, and this week I turned this into this.
Pew pew pew, many pews, pew pew pew.
Up until this point, all my towers did was exist on the board and update the pathfinding. That kind of defeats the purpose of a tower defense game. They have to do something. So I began work on my skill system. My skill system works a little bit like this. Firstly, a tower has a skill. It could be a projectile skill. That skill can have 0 to many modifiers attached to it. For example, multi-shot, or piercing, or chaining. The order of these doesn't matter, but all modifiers must modify the base skill. Now what do I mean by this? Let's take a look. Here is a tower shooting a projectile, in this case a big blue ball, at the enemies once every second. That's the base skill. Now, I've added a modifier where it's shooting 3 big blue balls at the enemies every second. And now a different modifier again. This is shooting 5 big blue balls at the same time every second. And then we can combine these. So here we see that 5 big blue balls are being shot 3 times every second. I'm sure some of you have seen other games that have a similar concept to this. The idea of this is purely to put a ton of customization in the player's hands, so hopefully no 2 players will play the game the same way. Let's have a quick look at how this all works. Our base skill, in this case a projectile, is an iSkill instance. So our iSkill instance looks like this. We can do something when the skill is equipped or unequipped. We have an update loop. And then we have to define the skill type and what kind of modifiers it can accept. For example, you can't put a split projectile modifier on an aura type skill. Here we see the implementation for the arrow skill instance. I should probably rename it to projectile skill instance, but whatever. In this case, it's an arrow. The additions here to the base interface are the fire modifier and emission modifier. Now this is where and how projectiles get fired. So the fire modifier affects when and how often to fire. The emission modifier modifies what to fire each time fire shoots. Different base skill types may also have different phases and different parts of the skill in which to add these modifiers. Now I've chosen this structure so that we can do things like this. Here we see a little bit of test code, which makes the examples I showed earlier work. In this case, we're adding an arrow skill instance to a tower, and then we're adding 2 modifiers. We're simply calling arrow add modifier, and then I'm choosing the modifier type. So in this case, we can add one of them, both of them, or neither of them. Add modifier also returns a boolean, so if for whatever reason you try to add the wrong type of modifier to the wrong type of skill, we'll know that. But for this basic test, I don't care about that too much because I know that these 2 modifiers work on the arrow skill. So how does all of this perform? In this example, we have 67 towers shooting 5 projectiles per shot and 3 shots per second. That's a total of 1005 shots per second, targeting the closest enemy, having collision detection, as well as spawning 100 enemies every second. And as we can see, it's running pretty smooth. You can see some of the blue balls disappearing here. That's because of collision detection. When a blue ball hits an enemy, it disappears. Later on, that's obviously going to be doing damage and, destroying an enemy, but we're not there yet. I don't have an FPS indicator built in here yet, so I'm just going on visual smoothness, and to me it looks pretty good. Let's up the ante a little bit. In this example, we have 71 towers, same number of shots, which gives a total of 1065 shots per second. And in this case, we're spawning 1000 enemies every second. I have no clue how long it takes an enemy to get from spawn to the goal, but let's assume about 10 seconds. So 1000 a second, 10 seconds to get there, that means we have about 10,000 enemies on the screen at any one time. And it's still running pretty smooth. It looks like maybe there's a slight bit of slowdown, but to be honest, the game is never going to have this many entities on the screen, so at this point in development, there's no point looking at making anything more efficient. Now that's the cool, exciting stuff that I did. The more mundane and boring stuff I did was a little bit of code cleanup. For example, here is the before of my render loop. You can see that the way I'm rendering the different things on the screen is all a bit inconsistent and ugly. So I've now turned the same function into this, and a single render world function does what we did before, which is also a little bit cleaned up. Bit nicer to read, and everything's a little bit more centralized. That's been my week in development. Time to go and listen to some jazz, chill out, and have a weekend. Catch you next week.